All right, everybody, this is Mr. Hayden. This is going to be Biology Week 6 live session. One of the issues that I had on Friday is that for some reason my session did not get recorded. So I'm going to go and do a quick little session right here. As you can see, there's no one in the room, and so we can be able to go through a little quick with this. If you have any questions, please make sure you contact me via Kmail, or definitely come in and ask those questions, okay? So again, we're doing Week 6. Let me go ahead and change my stylus. There you go. All right, so let's get going. Okay, so the essential question for this one's more of an essential statement, kind of. Basically, it's please describe isolation that occurs when land moves apart from each other through plate tectonics. So what you're going to kind of look like at is if, example, if here's some sort of a land mass, and you have species A, it's all over the place, so all over the place. So species A. And what happens is right here there starts to become some sort of like maybe a divergent boundary or whatnot, or another something going on where there's going to be some land pulling apart. Let me clear the page. And okay, so imagine that, and then and so what happens is as it starts to go into two completely different isolations, and maybe you have some water that goes inside here. Let's change this. So right here you have some water start to come in like this, and so you start to see separation of this way and this way. It gets to the point where not even animals that can walk, but even animals that can walk, but either other animals that can even fly, you'll start to see still that there is definitely a difference in the fact that these A species will start to be different from each other. As time goes by, and the big part of this, guys, is time, or generations more like. So, example, for the human population, a generation is obviously, whatever, a human lifetime or something, 60, 70 years. But in some cases, birds and whatnot, it could be a few weeks, years, things like that. So time is of the essence, but it's a time relative to the species. Over time, the species will start to adapt and become different than they originally did if the environment or whatnot actually says it needs that to actually happen. So what you'll eventually see is you'll see a species A and a species B on either side of the water, and they're completely different from each other. And over time, they can even get to the point where over more and more and more mutations and things like that, they might not even be able to mate with each other. So let's look at a few things. So Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium basically provides this framework for understanding the way populations evolve. And if you look, populations of a large amount of animals, such as the penguins that you see here. All right, so a couple of things. Actually, I think a few more slides that actually does a better representation. There we go. So Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium describes population that are not evolving. Basically, it means that they have the same genotypes if these things are met, okay? So example, if there's a huge, large population and no genetic drift, typically there is going to be not really evolving, okay? So these things not occurring. There's no immigration or immigration, and so the difference between the two is depending on the situation. Of example, if I was going to go to Canada, I would immigrate to Canada. But if I was Canada and I was looking at their perspective, if I was the U.S., I'd be immigrating to Canada. So I'd go from here to Canada, I'm going away from. If on the opposite side, I see that immigration would be the movement from one into the other. So what we need to do is make sure that the things are organisms are not moving in and out of the population. So example, there's no mutation. So there's nothing that if a mutation does pop up, that it is a mutation that's not looked upon as favorable to the species, so it doesn't, the species or the animal does not mate with other animals, and therefore the mutation will die off when the animal dies off. There's no sexual selection, so there's completely random dating. They're not just pick and choose based on the various traits, and if there's no natural selection, basically there's an equality for survival. There's not one that is greater than another. Those are all met, then there's no moving population. The issue is that happens all the time. So real populations rarely meet all 5 classifications. So we have to look and see how those populations evolve. I'll be talking about not just human a human, but I will also be looking at or talking about animals. So a few of these I'm just going to go and click through. None that matter that much. So if you have an initial population here, genetic drift is basically a bottlenecking. So example, you'll get a large genetic influx of a certain trait, and that will be more looked upon as these ones. And so these eventually will go away, and you'll only have the big bottleneck of these. And then eventually you'll start to get the same movement or the same look over here of all of them being the exact same color, depending on if that trait is favorable or non-favorable. Genetic flow is the concept of people immigrating into or emigrating out of a situation based on various traits. Maybe that there's a niche, that there's two different organisms going for, one does not meet that expectation, so leaves and takes its genes with it to another location and maybe is the strongest of that location. And then if that's the case, then they become genetically different. Mutation, so here's the mutation organelle. Now, if that mutation is looked upon as favorable to the survival of the species, and that mutation will actually grow inside of this population. If it does not, then it will actually die off when the animal dies off, and you would not get that mutation continuing in the population. Sexual selection. Typically, sexual selection is not completely random. You don't have a lottery to pick your wives and your husbands if you're human. You usually pick them based on various traits that you see favorable for your children or your offspring. So it has to be completely. It is not completely random. It is based on certain traits, and so therefore those choosing of those traits can really change the dynamic of a population over time. Natural selection, same concept, is that typically when you're going to mate with someone, being an animal, you pick the biggest, strongest, fastest, smartest animal, and the ones that are not typically will not mate, or if they do, their children can be considered weak, and eventually the population will die off. The idea of a species is to get stronger over time. A couple of those is that a big one here is that the environment changes all the time, and with changing environments, if you cannot change yourself, or if you cannot change your population, if it's a favorable one, then you'll grow. If it's an unfavorable one, your species will eventually die out, so it really matters. Now, the idea of speciation, or the idea of becoming a completely different species, is a few things. If populations become isolated or they separate from each other, new species get formed based on the needs of those different animals in their new environments. You can look at the fact that it's isolated populations over time, genetic differences that actually make up over time, but like I said earlier, a big one of those is the movement. Just in general, they just move over time. Reproductive isolation, members of a different population cannot mate successfully. Final step, becoming a separate species. That's important right there, is that if populations eventually become different, if it's a completely different species itself, is that they cannot mate with each other and make offspring, and so because they're completely different at that point. It takes a long time to do that. But again, it's based on it's based on like a how do you say? It's based on the generations of that population. So the fly example has only a few days to live. Its generations there's more and more generations per year than there is, say, of a human, because we just live longer and whatnot. If you look at behavioral isolation, such as mating and whatnot, here's behavioral, makes up the idea of courtship, mating behaviors, picking and choosing your mate, things like that, what you consider as good and bad. Here's a big one that happened earlier, and it does continue to happen because humans actually are starting to create this, but geographic barriers, such as the animals that are here in South America were the same as the ones in Africa, because at one time Africa and South America used to actually be together. And so the population, as it separated and pulled apart, the species became completely different. They both have ants. The ants are different. They both have birds. The birds are different. They both have animals. They both have trees. They both have all these different things, biotic factors that have changed over time because they became geographically isolated to each other. Sorry about that. Let me get back into this. My stylus is doing something weird. Okay. let's go back into it again. So, and there we go. Let me see. We good? Smiley face? Yeah, we're good. All right. So there's temporary barriers isolation, such as if there's an ice age or if there's some sort of maybe an ice storm or something that has happened. But typically the big ones are the fact that the land is actually moving away from each other. So again, what is speciation? Darwin kind of came up with the idea of the multiplication of species. Let's see here. Okay, the idea that there's mechanisms that create this that are created basically by various isolationist parts. We'll just look at these. This is the idea of post and prezygote. But we're going to look at basically 3 different ones that are main ones. This allopatric speciation is one of the concepts of the mode of speciation that allows for basically there's complete geographic isolation. So example, let's say there's land on one side, land on another, and all of a sudden a mountain gets formed right in the middle due to uplift of of various times. This is out over millions of years. The animals on this side cannot travel to the animals on this side, so therefore animal A became B on this side, and they became completely different. This has happened, example of wolves and coyotes, things like that. They change over time. There's no genetic flow from one side to another. Here's an example of that. We'll go to the next one. Here's some flies, the same concept that happens as they became, basically moved from older islands to newer islands. They became different species as they moved from one group to another. Parapatric speciation is the concept that there's some gene flow. So if there's movement back and forth, but it maybe is between, say, example, let's use the same concept of if there's a mountain here, and there's A here and B here, but various parts in history there was maybe so much snow or something like that that you could not go back and forth, but you could during certain times of the year or whatnot. That would definitely isolate the geographic part of those, and would not be a complete isolation. It gives you an example of the salamander as it goes down. So up here they're different than down here, and as they go down they change based on the environment that they're a part of. Sympatric is the concept that is completely evolves overlap. So example A and B right here, and there's the land. There is no mountain, or if there was a mountain, there is no real reason that they can't mate with each other, so they can go back and forth. There might be some isolation, but it does not hinder the mating. Okay, so an example is the maggot flies, things like that. Okay, so one of the questions is why do these evolve, or why does this take place? One is natural selection. The idea of the biggest, fastest, strongest, and whatnot mate. They're the ones that have babies. Their babies are stronger. Is for the overall movement of the species. Now these natural selections also can be, example like right here that's what we talk about biotic. So competitors, parasites, mating. Now we have other things that are abiotic. The abiotic is looking at temperature, altitude, changes in the environment that occur that you need to survive too. And those can be either biotic or abiotic depending on the situation. So let's give you an example. Like say you're a wolf in an area, you've been there forever, but for whatever reason, humans decided to ruin a whole other area, and the wolves from that area had to basically be able to survive. So they actually migrated into your area. Now there is, now there's some other issues. I'm sorry, that there's other issues that are coming together, and now you have 2 different sets of wolves trying to hold the same niche or the same area. And what's going to happen is they're going to fight, they're going to have some conditions. So an abiotic factor can become a biotic factor really quick, as well, based on the situation. And whoever the biggest, strongest, fastest of those wolves will survive. Sexual selection is a concept of, obviously, the female's choice, and then there's going to be a male-male competition to be able to get that mate, and whoever's the biggest, fastest, strongest, things like that is going to be there. Next. Okay, next. Okay, random drift may involve founder effects and genetic bottlenecks. So just random genetic movement or random genetics flows. Sometimes there'll be one different trait that will make its way through a population but is not considered, it's maybe considered a fad or considered something that's useful during that time or genetically for that time, and it changes over time. And alleles that are neutral in one environment may not be neutral in another. So you just got to see, like, as the environment changes, or as things change in general, how do the alleles affect, or how do the phenotypes that actually show affect inside that population? If it's something that's great, then it's really good for the population. If it's something that's bad, then it will not, and it will have effects directly on that individual or that organism to survive. So remember to go back and watch the, go back and look at the essential question. Make sure you answer that in the Dropbox, turned in for credit, and have a good day.